Welcome to Before, During, After, a Smirk Experience podcast about performance from the inside. Every week, I'll sit down with a professional comedian to unpack how they prepare for a gig, what they're thinking about while they're on stage, and how they reflect once it's over. Because great performances don't just happen, they're built. This week's guest is Matt Green, a top-notch comedian and actor. Matt and me discuss the first laughs he ever got and how addictive that can be. How what happens in the room is the show. And the benefit of always having gigs in the book. Plus, why vape shops are always so right. Enjoy. This is possibly quite a tricky question, but can you remember the first thing you said on stage that got a laugh?
That is probably a tricky question. Do you know what? I'm not sure I can, but it was definitely when I was quite young. I was always into doing readings at school and at church. And I always enjoyed being at the front. And I remember doing a reading at a cathedral service in Wakefield where I was brought up, and it's quite a big cathedral and it was quite a big deal. And I can't remember if it was probably a school thing, but it might have been just a church thing. And I had to read, some Bible verses or something, and that being quite a big deal. And I was quite young then, probably 9 or 10 maybe, and that being enjoying that and that being exciting. I remember doing school plays when I was at primary school. There was one we did at the end of I think my last year at primary school. I think it was the last year at primary school, and it was the 60s review, and so it was like a kind of show where it told the history of the 1960s, which back then was not as long ago. And it was the time that all the adults in the room had been alive. So, and I remember, and I was doing we did some various things. And one of the things I did was a newsreader role at one point. And I think I probably had at least one joke in that, and there was some sort of response, but I don't remember that being sort of particularly specifically about being funny. But then it was later, it was when I was a bit older, sort of 10, 11, 12, maybe, doing sort of sketch type things at school and at, again, sort of church kind of stuff. And I do remember getting laughs. I do remember like doing jokes or doing, doing a sort of a sketch character or something and getting laughs, and that being a nice feeling. I remember that being a nice feeling. I don't remember a kind of, I didn't have a bolt from the blue moment of like, this is what I have to do for the rest of my life. But I do remember enjoying that feeling of getting an audience to laugh and making them feel good for a second, and that making me feel good. And then as I got a bit older, as I got into kind of doing more stuff at school plays and then later university, I realized more and more, I really like getting laughs. That's the fun bit. Yeah. I like doing sort of straight acting as well, and that's I still do that. But I realized, when I was kind of probably late teens, I was like, there's something I've got pretty good timing. I can kind of I can turn a line. I can make an audience laugh if that's what the point of the line is.
Absolutely. It's almost like climbing higher and higher up a tree, isn't it? Like doing a reading, that makes you nervous and you get a sort of satisfaction afterwards. But I think it's kind of like a few branches higher than that.
Yeah.
Where you start getting laughs, and that's kind of like, oh, blimey. Yeah, this is even better than just reading stuff out.
Yeah, it is addictive, and it is a rush, and it gives you that kind of whatever the dopamine hit or whatever, or endorphins or something. And there's something about that. And I think initially, for a long time, it would be getting laughs from other people's material. But then there is something particularly exciting about getting a laugh from your own jokes, from jokes that you've written yourself. And that would be towards the end of secondary school, I wrote sketches and reviews with friends, and I wrote a play, and it was a kind of fairly serious, I mean, very adolescent play, but it did have some jokes in it. And I remember, and I was performing in the show as well, and I remember, you know, those moments of getting a laugh from jokes that you've written is particularly exciting. And that feeling of like, oh wow, this is this has just come from my head, and now it's making people laugh. That is a powerful feeling.
No, it is. I almost think it's a bit like being a drug dealer in a way, but the drug you're selling is the endorphins that everybody's bodies release when they find something funny. Like, and you're watching everyone going, oh wow. It's like, I did that.
Yeah, but it's a drug dealer where you get the hit as well.
Yes.
Yes. And so, and it's a similar thing in that you start to need a bigger hit. You know, each time it builds, and
right,
and the kind of, you know, and I think people talk about this a lot when they talk about, you know, their early gigs. Certainly, early on. If I now look back at some of those early gigs, if I had recordings of them, which because I was started a while ago, I don't have like video recording of a lot of my early stuff, and in a way, thank goodness. But I think if I did have, I think I would probably look back and go, gosh, I wasn't getting that many laughs, but it's just, I was getting a few. I got enough to kind of keep me going. But now I would look back at a gig like that and think that's not a great gig. But at the time, it felt fine. It felt good because I was getting some laughs. And now, if I did that gig now, I'd be like, oh gosh, that was quite a bad gig because I didn't get very much. So your standards go up, and your threshold for what is a good show goes up.
Absolutely.
And also the effect it has on you goes up. You know, like you have to, you know, if you're playing a small room, then maybe you don't particularly get much of a rush from it. But if you the bigger the room, you know, the bigger the rush. And if you go to a big theatre show or something, which is something I do occasionally, I still get the nerves. I still get the excitement of, this is 400 or 500 people or something. That's quite exciting. Whereas if I'm just playing in front of 50 people, maybe a bit less, you know, maybe I'm now sort of not so bothered. But again, 10 years ago, I'd have been much more worried about that. You know, 50 people would have felt like a lot. So it's that sort of change in your standards is a bit, as you say, a bit like being a drug dealer. You have to keep going for the bigger hit.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. No, there's lots in that I agree with. Like, patterns and habits in our lives are mapped out in like neural pathways in our brains, and the more you do something, the bigger the neural pathway gets, so it becomes more normal to you. Like when you just pass your driving test, your hands are kind of clamped at 10 to 2, and you know you're doing that. Whereas fast forward 10, 20 years, you're talking with someone, maybe you're looking out the window, changing what song you're listening to because you're more comfortable with it.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, I think that people are always guilty sometimes, or always natural to compare any room to what in your head is like the kind of gold standard, as opposed to just thinking, well, they all enjoyed that. That was better for them than, I don't know, watching some crap on Netflix for a night. Whereas in your head, you're thinking, oh, that bit got an applause break once, and these buggers haven't done that. And it's important to kind of step back and go, no, that was still good.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And I think something I've worked really hard on in the last few years is is trying not to show the audience if I don't think I'm having a good gig, you know, or if they, or, you know, if I feel like they're not a great audience, they're not responding brilliantly, or there's something wrong with the room, or the setup's not great, or whatever. I mean, sometimes you can get a laugh from that. You can kind of comment on, the backdrop's fallen down, or the mic's not working, or whatever. But the basic idea of, you know, they've come to see a show, you've come to do a show, let's just make the best show we can, I think is quite a simple but quite a difficult thing to remember. And the number of acts, you know, even very, very famous acts who will sometimes throw a gig because they feel like it's not quite right. You know, they haven't, it's not quite happening. Or as you say, you know, that joke got a massive laugh last night, and tonight it's not got anything, and what's going on? And and you just have to accept that there's something wrong with the chemistry that night. There's something, you know, maybe it's you, maybe you stuttered over a word, or you fluffed something, or even just what you're wearing, or what you look like, or what the stage is, or something is not quite right. Or maybe there's something in the atmosphere of the room. Maybe there are too many empty seats at the front, or whatever it is. There's something is creating a difficult energy in the room, and it's your job as the performer to try to just work with what you've got and make the best of the situation. And you can certainly walk off stage and go, that wasn't my best gig. But I think saying it on stage, and I think a lot of people do this, and I can see why they do it. It's a defense mechanism. It's a protective thing to do, to say, you know, well, this is a bit shit, isn't it? Or you're not of a great audience, or this was better last week, or make some sort of self-deprecating joke about what's happening. And I think you can kind of get away with that once in a show.
Yeah, right.
But if you keep doing it, and if you keep sort of blaming the audience, and you keep blaming the setup, or saying something's wrong with the lighting or whatever, very quickly the audience gets bored and doesn't really get it. And you've got to remember, you're in the room with them. This is all that's happening. You know,
Exactly.
I think it's a Stuart Lee line, which I've heard other people repeat, that, you know, what happens in the room is the show. And whether or not the show is what you are trying to present or not is sort of irrelevant. It's what's happening now is what's happening. And it sounds almost a bit obvious, but almost tautological, but it's really important, I think, when you're in live performance. And I think that's where live performance is different from recorded performance videos, you know, TV, acting, that kind of thing, where you can start and stop again. You can change lenses, you can have a whole different go, you can try a different way of doing it. Like, what's happening in a live show is just what's happening in that moment.
Yeah, right.
And as far as they're concerned, that is the show. So, you know, if you walk on stage and you've just had a bad day and you take that out on the audience, then that's the show. Like, you know,
yes, because they don't know
yeah.
how it normally is. It might be one of the only times that they've come to comedy. You're absolutely right. We had a gig in the little village where I now live, and there was a woman in the front row who was drunk, and she left to go to the toilet halfway through a act because she was drunk. And she got lost. Instead of going to the toilet, she walked through the stage door and ended up on the stage.
Right, yeah.
While James Dowdeswell was in halfway through a set.
Yeah.
And the more experienced you are doing it, the more things like that are just like part of it, as you say, you know. And, you know, Dowdeswell, you know, handled it brilliantly, as you'd expect. But what really struck me was when I chat with people around the village who I bump into about the show, they were just like amazed by it. They were like, oh my God, what about that woman, Sam? And I was just kind of saying that, but in different words. But I was like, well, that's the ride, isn't it? You know, you don't know what's going to happen, but that's what makes it wonderful.
Totally.
You know?
And I think that, and what's interesting about that is, I bet, well, maybe not in that situation, that's a particularly extreme version of it, but certainly when people heckle, or when something weird happens in the room, or there's some crowd work which goes in an unexpected direction, the number of people who afterwards will say to you, was that set up? Was that deliberate? You know, does that happen every night? Do you always get them to shout that out every night, or whatever? Because they kind of can't believe that you could just come up with stuff off the top of your head, you know, and
that there's such a range of things that can happen.
Yeah. And you know, you always think, well, I'd love it if that happened every night, but of course it's not going to happen every night. You know, every night is different, and there's that amazing. And I think, again, we've all had that experience of ad-libbing a joke or a response to something, and then thinking, oh, that was really good, that worked really, really well. I'll do that again tomorrow, and I'll try to somehow create that, you know, create it out of nothing, and I'll try and sort of shoehorn that joke in, and even, you know, or even sort of set up what happened the previous night. You wouldn't believe what happened last night. It was this woman, you know, and I said the funny thing, and everyone's like, well, why is that funny? You know, you're just telling us, you're just making yourself look good. You know, that's not funny. It's only funny in the moment, you know. And sometimes, very, very occasionally, there'll be an ad lib that you do. I mean, I've had the, you know, as you say, when you've been doing it long enough, things come around, and it's like when you know, I do a lot of comparing, and you talk to people with lots of jobs, and, you know, there are plenty of jobs that I don't really know much about and haven't really got anything funny to say about, but I'll try and find something funny in the moment. But then there are other jobs that someone says, and then you think of something funny in the moment, or even, you know, you think of something funny later when you think, oh, I should have said blah, blah, blah. But then that job comes up again 3 years later, you know, and in that moment you think, oh, yeah, I said there was something I was going to say last time, and it's in your head, and then and then again, it makes you look really quick. And, you know, some of the best compares out there, someone like Stephen Grant or someone, you know, he's been doing it a long, long time. And he's almost got like a database now in his head. Right. Pretty much every joke, every job you've ever heard, or every part of the country or every part of the world, he's got a gag about, you know. And it's very, you know, when that's working, when that's really, you know, firing, that kind of stuff is very impressive to watch.
No, very much so. Very much so. Talking of gags, you make a living in part out of spotting things that normal people miss. Does that change your outlook on the world in any way?
Good question. I don't know. I mean, I think, yeah, I suppose I do observational material, not exclusively.
No.
And I do, you know, quite a lot of what I do is stories and bits of topical material, and as I say, sort of ad-libbing and things. But yeah, there is definitely a sort of theme of observational material. I suppose, yeah, I think what I've realized with that stuff is, yes, I think I maybe do see the world slightly differently to some people, and I'm definitely someone who sees patterns and particularly linguistic things, you know, language things. I'll hear a phrase and it'll sort of stick in my head, and I think, why is that? That's an odd phrase, or that sounds a bit funny or something. And what I've realized about all these things, or observations, is you've just got to write them down straight away. You know, you've got to immediately, you know, I have a notes on my phone. I have just like reams and reams of these things, and quite a lot of them never go anywhere. You know, I'll just write something down and I go, there's something funny, isn't there, about how when you're on a train and this happens, or when you're walking down the street and you walk past a shop, and why is it that I'll give you a good example. This is one that I came up with the other day, and I haven't done have new material recently. I've been quite busy with lots of various things, and so I haven't really had a chance to write lots of new material. So I'm beginning to get a bit of a backlog of little bits and pieces that I've kind of thought about and written down and haven't yet tried out. And one day, maybe over the summer or maybe in the autumn, I'll kind of book some new material nights and sort of go and try some of these things out. Because at some point, as you know, you just kind of got to get these things out of your head. But here's one example, and this may or may not ever be funny or a joke, but it's just a thing I noticed. Why is it that vape shops have incredibly bright lights?
Right.
Like there's two in Beckenham where I live now, and every time I go past them, like it doesn't matter what time of day or night, they're incredibly bright. Like, you know, they're unusually bright. It's like you're walking past a kind of something alien, like an alien spaceship. These incredibly bright LED lights, and it's just, and I've noticed that all over the place. You know, wherever you go around the UK, the vape shops are really, really bright. Okay. And so it's sort of going, okay, well, what is that? Is that funny? Is that interesting? I don't know if that's interesting or not. Maybe it's not. Maybe no one else has noticed that, and therefore maybe no one will care. But maybe I think there might be something in that. I think there might be something in what are they? Why is it so bright? Is it because vaping is bad for your eyesight? Is that something about, you know? Is it something? Are they worried that people are going to steal the vapes, so they've got to keep the lighting really bright? Is it? You know, are they all secretly also growing marijuana in the back, and that's why they need lots of? Do you know what I mean? So there's a bunch of different directions that might go in, and I think if you do a new material night, what's fun about that is that you can kind of go through all of the options almost and go like, is this funny? Is that funny? Does that work? Is that interesting? Do people connect with that? Is that something? And I know what will happen is, because this is the kind of consistent pattern of new material jokes, is that you go to a new material night and every joke you write you think could work, like because you won't try them if you don't think they're going to work. They'll be the ones that you leave on the page. But but there's this weird feeling, this weird moment where, as you're saying the joke, before they've responded, before they've even laughed or not laughed, if it's going to work or not. Right. Because there's something about that feeling of being in front of an audience, and it's experience as well. It's partly experience, but I think it's, you get it quite early. As you're saying it, you're like, oh, this isn't good. Like this. Yeah. I don't know why I said that. Why did I write that down? That makes no sense at all. And the audience can feel that you're feeling that, and they don't laugh. But then there are other ones where you kind of go, I don't know, I think there might be something in this. And you try it. And as you say it, you think, do you know what? I think there is something in this. I think I can feel that there's something in this. I can feel that there's an energy to this observation. And an audience smiles or laughs or reacts to it. And then you then have to kind of grab onto that and think, right, what is it about the observation that's funny? Is it the initial observation? Or quite often it's actually something a bit later in the joke that is the really good bit. Yeah. And then grab that bit and then make that the main bit of the joke. And but it's funny. Like it's really hard to know, because that's the thing about observational comedy. You don't know if you see the world like everyone else.
Yeah. I've had things where I've been in a shared experience with a group of people, and then I'll say at the end of it, did you notice that thing? Did you notice that the landlord who threw the dog out of the pub at lunchtime, 10 o'clock at night, it was actually his dog that was in the pub biting people? And some of the people I'm with kind of go, oh my God, I had no idea about that. And you kind of go, oh, I thought that was really obvious. But we're all kind of wired up differently, aren't we?
Yeah, and I think if you do comedy, one of the things you have to be good at is patterns, is seeing patterns and patterns, rhythms. It's all quite kind of basic in a way. Like when you come down to it, it's all quite, or primal or whatever the word is. But it's it's about pattern recognition. It's about seeing rhythm, because comedy has rhythm is really important, and seeing how if you push this joke a bit too far, then it's going to sort of collapse and it's not going to make sense anymore. But equally, you've got to have enough tension. You've got to build enough tension for the joke to work at all. So it's finding those kind of those distances between setup and punchline and things. And a lot of it becomes instinctive. You can sit down and really think about it, but actually a lot of it happens in the moment. A lot of it happens often, I think people, I've heard people use the phrase, the stage is the best editor. And it's so true that so many times I will write long form jokes out, long stories or thoughts or ideas I've had, and it will be 3 or 4 pages of my notebook. And then when I actually come to do it in front of an audience, your brain just edits it. It just edits the stuff out that isn't interesting.
Yeah, it does.
And you'll find yourself halfway through a bit going, I don't know why am I saying this? This is obviously not good. And you click and you sort of skip to the next bit, and then you've got to remember where the punchlines are. That's the hard bit with new materials, remembering where the bits are that you thought were really funny and make sure you say those bits. But your brain is doing the editing all the time, and you come off stage and you think, God, I only said about a third of what I thought I was going to say. But that turns out that was the important bit.
Yeah. Absolutely. And sometimes when you're listening to someone tell a story whose brain isn't conditioned in that way, you almost want to be like, right, time out. What you did last Wednesday is nothing to do with this story. So next time you tell it, just get rid of it.
Yeah. Skip to the end. Yeah. Well, it's the classic sort of, to be a cliche, the sort of the mother-in-law story where it's like so the thing is, actually, before I tell you this, I need to tell you that, was it Derek or was it Graham? I can't remember. And it's like, none of this matters. Like, I don't know who any of these people are anyway. It doesn't matter. You could just make up a name. And I think, again, that's the thing. I think something that as a stand-up, you have to develop an ability unless you're, there are a few, and there are a few, but there aren't many stand-ups who genuinely only tell the truth, who are really, really strict about that and will never embellish or change. And I can't think of more than one or two who actually genuinely do that. But most of us, you realize, a story has to be sculpted, and you have to go, do you know what? It did happen on a Friday, but I think it'd be funnier if it happened on a Saturday.
Or totally.
And actually, do you know what? I was with my wife, but it'd be funnier if I was with my friends, or vice versa, or
exactly. Or you get rid of links. Like if your friend tells a story about their friend that's really good, then if you take out the middle friend in that chain, and the story then just becomes, so my friend's a vet, and then you're telling that story, as opposed to say, my buddy knows someone who's a vet, because the audience are like, hang on a minute, where are we? They just want it simplified. And that goes back to editing. What are the important bits about this story?
Yeah. What do you need to know and what don't you need to know?
Precisely.
And I mean, I've done some sort of writing and directing with people, particularly of their sort of Edinburgh shows. And I think so much, the word I use over and over again, and I'm sure if any of the people I've worked with, if you ask them, they'd say they got bored of me saying this word, but the word is clarity. I just say over and over again, what is we need more clarity here. Why do we need to know this? And what are the things we need to know and what don't we need to know? And let's not worry about those bits. Yeah. And it's very easy. And the thing is, it's very easy or I find it quite easy to spot that in other people. It's much harder to spot it in yourself. Yeah, because when you're telling the story, it's sort of everything matters, because you think, well, it did matter that it was a Friday, and it did matter that I was wearing this shirt, and it did matter where I was, and it did matter who I was with, because these things are all part of the real truth of the story. But then you have to sort of develop an ability or a sort of a lack of care of whether the details are actually fundamentally true or not. It's about whether they actually work, And if it makes it funnier to say that it was a Saturday rather than a Friday, then it's a Saturday, and don't worry about it and just get on with your life.
Completely, because you aren't actually like giving evidence in court under oath. Fundamentally, you're just trying to entertain a group of people.
Exactly.
And the stuff that's going from your head, you want it all 100% downloaded into your audience's head, without it being like a game of Chinese whispers or something where bits get lost along the way. And you're absolutely right. Clarity is the thing that so many communicators kind of lose sight of. Tell me, Matt, in the years that you've been going, how has your pre-show routine changed in that time? What did you do when you first started? What do you do now?
So I don't think I've ever had a really clear pre-show routine in some ways. I remember talking to someone very early on about drinking at shows. And I don't drink alcohol anymore, but I used to. And but I was never like a really big drinker, but I would, have a couple of pints after a gig sometimes. But I remember very, very early on someone saying, you've got to be really careful about drinking before a gig, because it could ruin it. It could mean that you are too slow and you don't, your brain isn't working properly and you slur your words, or you just forget things or whatever. But in a way, worse is if you get better when you drink. That's what. And there are definitely some acts that we've all seen, and some of whom have sadly it has consumed them literally.
Absolutely, yes.
And others have, some have made their way through it, and others have not. But there was that, and I think that's changed a lot over the years. Actually, there was, when I started out, sort of nearly 25 years ago now. There definitely still was very much this idea of the comedian as the kind of rock and roll, going out late, drinking, drugs, and not really doing anything else, just sort of your weeks were your own and then you'd come out of the weekends. That's obviously changed a huge amount now. People have got loads more stuff to do. Social media's taken over everything. Everyone's videoing stuff and editing and everyone's busy doing other things if they can. The circuit can't support a lifestyle in the way it used to. And people have just got a lot more savvy about, look, I'm not going to get drunk every night because then I'm not going to be able to do it. And people, are fit, work on their fitness and all that kind of stuff. So that's a bit of a tangent to say, but I remember someone saying, don't have a drink before your first gig, partly because you'll be nervous and it will go straight to your head, but also what happens if it goes really well? And then you'll have a sort of superstition of like, I've got to have a drink before I do a gig. Yeah, and there was a period where I used to always have a Coke before a gig because it would give me a bit of a pep. And I would kind of, get a little bit of a rush from the sugar and stuff. And again, I sort of stopped doing that a few years ago because I thought, A, it's not very good for me. Drinking a glass of Coke every time I do a gig's a bit silly. But again, it's like, do I actually really need this? And if I don't need it, why am I? It's becoming a sort of placebo thing, and it's becoming a kind of superstition. And then what happens, as does happen? What happens if you turn up and there's no Coke available, or they only have weird, sort of Coke that you get from bottles, which isn't made by Coca-Cola, and you think, I don't really want that. And
roller cola. Exactly. I can't go on with roller cola. I'm a professional.
You don't want to be that guy. You don't want to be the guy going, I've got to have a certain kind of thing, and you don't want to be traveling in your car with cans of specific things. And similarly, I've had jokes about things I wear or whatever. And again, it's like, you can't get into that sort of pattern because then you just, again, what happens when that shirt falls apart and you can't do the joke about the funny shirt anymore? So I suppose long story short, I've tried to not have too much of a ritual before I do things because, and again, that's come from doing a lot of comparing, a lot of show running, being responsible for booking shows and for running shows.
Yeah.
You've done this, that sometimes some dramatic thing happens. There's a problem at the door. Someone's turned up late or drunk, or someone's cancelled the gig at the last minute, or,
absolutely.
An audience member's started arguing with you, or or the manager of the bar suddenly has got a problem with something, or a light breaks, or the mic's not working, or whatever it is. Something happens, and you are at least partly, if not wholly, responsible for it.
Yep.
And also, you're going to have to go on and do the show, and you're going to have to also, usually in that case, compare, but sometimes, do a set. And just by dint of just repetition, I have got better and better at just putting those things to one side and getting on with it, and being very, very focused on what's happening off stage until the second I'm on stage, and then clicking into the show. And I definitely still sometimes find myself on stage after the first minute or two thinking, gosh, I feel like my brain is still slightly off stage, and I have to kind of really have a word with myself in my head and don't think about that whatever's happening over there, maybe that person's going to run off and tell somebody, but just, you've got to get on with what's happening now. And so, I would love, I definitely feel better when I'm doing like a tour show and I've got loads of time and the audience come in on time, and running the show is not my responsibility. That's the venue's responsibility. I'm sitting in a green room on my own dressing room because I don't have a support. I do my own support act. And so I'm sort of sitting quietly backstage, and I give myself time to think about what's going to happen and look at my notes maybe, or, do a few deep breaths, a little bit of just focusing, and a little bit of, not quite meditation, but just a little bit of kind of getting yourself in the zone. That's really nice. And sometimes a bit of a vocal warm up. If I'm doing like a long show, I might need to warm my voice up a bit. That's really nice. And if I get to do that, that's great. And I enjoy that. And it does probably make my shows a little bit better when I do that. But I am also aware that when I'm doing a normal club gig, particularly if it's one that I'm in some way involved in running, or even just I'm comparing and therefore I have a certain amount of responsibility for it, I can't be one of those people who's like, I have to have 5 minutes before the show to center myself and make sure everything's in the right place, because Otherwise, yeah, you'll just spend the whole time stressed because that's not realistic.
Absolutely right. No, I agree with all of that. Do you prepare differently for comedy versus acting gigs?
Yeah, I mean, comedy, obviously, stand up, you're largely, I'm largely doing material that I'm fairly confident in and I kind of know what's happening with. If I'm doing a new material night, it's a bit different. I'm going on with notes maybe, or I'm trying to remember what I'm going to say. And that's a whole different thing we've already talked about. But acting is very different. You know, acting, I tend to, if I'm doing acting now, it's almost always TV acting or maybe film acting. I don't do very much stage because it kind of clashes with stand up a lot. And so it's kind of hard to take loads of time out to go and do a play. Not that I wouldn't do one, you know, I'd be up for doing one if one came around, but I haven't done many auditions for stage work in the last few years. But yeah, if you're doing a TV thing, then you know you've got to make sure you know your lines, and you've got to know what you're doing and what your character is, and you've got to get into costume and all of those things. And then when you're on a set, I think the thing that's quite interesting as a difference between acting and stand-up that I've really noticed in the last few years when I've been doing both is when you're on stage as a stand-up, you are the show. You know, you're in control. It's what you say and what you do that matters, and you're very, very aware. People talk about, you know, reading the room, and that's something about like having this sort of 360 awareness of what's happening in the room. Is someone talking? Is there a phone going off? Is a glass wobbling or something? You know, like, and you're trying to sort of see, right, what are the things I can just ignore and get on with, and what are the other things that I think I probably need to address that, because otherwise that could make this joke not work. Or if someone coughs at a weird time, you know, the worst way to start a gig, and it's happened loads of times because we've been doing it a long time, is that you do your opening joke, and as you get to the punchline, someone coughs.
Yeah.
Or someone drops a glass or something. And everyone's distracted. Yeah. And they don't realise, the audience don't realise, because they're not paying as much attention. They're not, you know, they're just watching a show. They're not in that heightened state that you are.
Yeah.
All they see is that you didn't do a joke, that you just weren't funny. And they don't know why. They can't really work out why you weren't funny, because it sounded like he was telling a joke and then didn't really have a punchline. And they don't understand why the cough ruined it. And then you've really got to work hard for the second joke and make sure that second joke doesn't get coughed over, and do whatever you can to, you know, and if that gets coughed over as well, then you're in real trouble, you know, and it's that sort of escalating problem. Whereas I think when you're on a film set or a TV set, it's so the opposite way around. There are like dozens of people whose job is to make sure everything is right, to make sure the lighting is right, the sound is working, the costumes, the product, the production design, everything's in the right place, that you're in the right place. You know, the sort of the cliche of being an actor is that you're treated like a sort of child, but it's true. You know, you really are. You know, there's always a runner next to you going, "You okay? Do you need a cup of tea? You okay? Do you need to see the script? Do you want to go back to your trailer?" You know, and that's because the way a film set works is everything takes ages to get right.
Yeah, it does.
And then as an actor, you've got to be on. You've got to be on straight away. Like there's no messing around. There's no rehearsal. Basically, I mean, there's a crew rehearsal. They show you sort of the blocking, but there's very little rehearsal in film and TV these days. It just isn't time. They don't have the money, so you don't have like time to go, is this working? Is that not working? Can I try this? You kind of got to be ready and get on with it straight away.
Yeah.
And so as an actor, your job as an actor is, I think, very different, is to sort of exist in a sort of slightly zen state.
Yes.
For most of the time.
Yeah.
Until you're called onto set and until you're ready and you're in front of the camera, and then it's to be on for those 2 minutes that the scene's happening. And then when they call cut, it's to go, okay, I'm fine. I'm now just back, just sitting down, and I'm not really. And I think as an actor who does stand-up, that can be quite difficult because it's quite hard to turn that part of your brain off.
Yeah.
Is going, I wonder why that's happening over there. And is that meant to be there? I feel like maybe that cup was in a different position in the last take. Is that? and then you start second guessing yourself and like, oh, did I not hold? Oh no, I should have held that. And all these continuity things start going through your head. But if you're on if you're on a really tiny little short film shoot where there's only 3 members of the crew, then maybe you do need to pay attention to that stuff. But if you're on a TV show or a film, there's definitely someone whose job it is to check that, and you have to let go of that responsibility and just your responsibility is to be the character in that moment and to just do your performance. And
got it.
And that is hard. That is hard, I think. And I've definitely found myself on sets thinking like a director, or thinking like a kind of and thinking, well, or a continuity, or a script supervisor, going, I feel like that person didn't do their line properly, or maybe I'm not sure that's the right word there, or and then you've got to be like, well, that's not my job. It's just not my job, and it's actually quite a taboo to say to another actor as an actor, I think you maybe got that line wrong, or like that's really not your job. Your job is to do your bits, your bit, and let them get on with their bit. Unless they ask you, unless they say, I think I got that wrong. Did I get that wrong? And then you can be like, oh, I don't know, maybe you did. I'm not sure. But that sort of feeling of trying to just be on your own, and that's why the best actors often are people who are just able to genuinely switch off, not worry about anything else, and then switch on when it's necessary. And I think, and as stand-ups, that can, I think, you see sometimes with stand-ups acting, there's that slight energy of like, why is it not all about me?
No, exactly. You're right. There are similarities, but there are definitely differences. I've had some of your comedy touch on aspects of modern life. We mentioned about editing stuff for social media and stuff like that. Do you think audiences now are easier or harder to make laugh than what they were 25 years ago when you started?
In terms of the live audiences?
Yeah. Or are they about the same?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a big difference. I think there are some differences maybe in expectation. I think audiences are maybe a bit more distractible, like we all are. People, we've all got our phones in our pockets, and people are always aware that there's something happening in their pocket that they could just get their phone out and look at it. So I think there's a lot of comics have said, post COVID, there has been maybe an increase in that, of people looking like they're just not that interested because they've got their phone, or people filming things or taking photos in the middle of shows in the way that they maybe just wouldn't have done before. But this feeling of like, so there is a bit of that. And I think also the proliferation of crowd work clips. I've shared some. They can be quite effective as a way of sharing what you do, and then you don't burn your material, which is why people like doing them. But there are so many now. There are so many crowd work clips that I think for some gigs and for some audiences, particularly maybe Central London shows and younger audiences who've really grown up on TikTok and Instagram, for them, crowd work is stand up, and they don't really understand a stand up if they're just telling jokes. They're like, what is this? You're not bringing the audience in. And and I think that can sometimes, an audience you can feel like are a bit like, why aren't they talking to? And then obviously, and very much the opposite happens too. Very much you can feel the audience going, why are you still talking to me? Like, just do some jokes, I think particularly the older, I do think it's a slightly generational thing. I think that the older crowds generally just want some jokes, and the slightly younger crowds generally are a bit more into the crowd work, and they kind of feel like they're meant to be part of the show. I also think, I think I might say something slightly contradictory in that I think audience behavior has probably got slightly better over the years. Like, I think when I first started out, heckling was a bit more common. I think people were drunker. People drank more. People would get more out of control. Now, none of this applies to Christmas, because Christmas shows are sort of their own thing, and can be. But equally, I remember some absolutely dreadful Christmas shows I was at a few years ago, and I haven't been at a show as bad as that for a while. Like for several years, where a whole group just goes completely feral and just ruins the show for everybody. Now it happens every year that does happen, and comedians sit around and talk about it in January and compare horror stories.
Yep.
But I do think, cost of living, I think people aren't drinking as much generally.
Yep.
There's a lot more people drinking, non-alcoholic beer and just not drinking much or whatever. And so I do think audiences have got a little bit better behaved.
Yeah.
There are slightly fewer sort of stags and hens in shows who kind of are there just to wreck the evening for everyone else.
Yeah.
I mean, and the other thing I think that has happened is perhaps a more political thing. I think the world has become a more polarized place.
Yes.
And a scarier place, in the last 10 years. And a more, a more worrying and a more kind of worrisome, and people are worried about lots of things, lots of political things and social things, and cost of living and the environment and all these kind of things. And so I think there maybe is a slight edge of that in some gigs now, that audiences don't like to talk about that stuff, that if you bring it up, there's a kind of a reaction of like, I came to get away from this. I don't want to talk about politics. I don't want to talk about. I don't want you to talk about the environment. I don't want you to talk about Donald Trump or whatever. Now that's, again, varies hugely, and there are some gigs where people will be absolutely fine with that and desperate for you to do that. But there's maybe more of a polarization that you can't assume. I think like maybe 10, 20 years ago, with a comedy audience, you could maybe sort of assume a rough political kind of position, but now it's much more varied and much more difficult to predict. And you can't just go on and go, Nigel Farage is awful, isn't he? And expect everyone to agree with you. Now they might do, but they might not. And you might have to deal with that, and I think people are maybe a bit less, I think audiences are a bit less willing to just go along with you if they disagree with you.
Yeah. That's interesting.
It's the sort of commentification of the world, that everyone can leave a comment now on everything. And so if you say, now I'm not talking from personal experience here, but I have seen it happen. I've seen it happen to other people. It hasn't happened to me particularly, but I've seen it happen to other people that, do a joke about Donald Trump being an idiot, and then someone goes, I don't agree with that. I think he's great, or something, or do a joke about, I don't know, something happening in the politics or something that's a bit controversial. And instead of an audience just sort of going, okay, I just, I might not like that, I might not laugh at it, but someone else will be coming on in a minute, and that's fine. They have to sort of put their stamp on the show and go, no, I disagree with that, and I have to tell you that I disagree with it.
Because that's it. Because I think social media makes it very easy to operate in echo chambers.
Yeah.
Doesn't it? Like,
yeah, of course, yeah.
What you just surround yourself, you follow people that vote the same way or think the same things. And then pre-social media, if someone said something that you didn't agree with, you would be more used to that. And as you say, you would go, oh, yeah, fair enough. He really likes Zach Polanski, or he really likes Nigel Farage, or whoever it is. Oh, fair enough. Vive la différence. Whereas now it kind of sticks in people's throats a little bit. Like, what are you saying? Zach Polanski doesn't know basic numbers. He'll crash the economy. It's whatever it is, those types of things that I do think have changed society in a way. And who knows, maybe this social media ban for kids might herald, everyone stepping back a little bit from it.
Yeah, the joke I've made about that in a video that I'd made this week is is really more about. I think it's I would compare social media, certainly parts of it, to a sort of toxic waste dump, and it's like we're now saying, well, yes, I know everyone's been swimming in this toxic waste dump for years, but we're going to stop kids swimming in it.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, great. That's good. I think that's a good idea. But also maybe we should clean up the toxic waste dump. Like maybe
for
the fact that maybe we're all swimming in it and maybe that's not a great thing. And maybe we should be careful because I think it's undeniable to get a bit political for a minute. It's undeniable that politics across the world has been radically reshaped by social media and
massively.
And sadly, maybe initially it looked like it might have quite a positive effect, and there were kind of, the Arab Spring, and there was a sense in which social media could be used for positive and revolutionary in a sort of, well, revolutionary maybe, obviously can be very negative as well, but it can be used as a sort of way of organizing people and bonding people together and all that kind of stuff. But it's clear now that what it does is, because of the way the algorithms are set up and because of the motivations of the people who run the social media companies, which are pretty, divisive and
it's just
negative.
that. It's just money.
It's money, and well, I think more than that for people like Musk. I think Musk is,
No, you're right. It's
pretty right wing and borderline fascist in many ways.
Then they've got their axe to grind as well, so they start kind of thumbing the scales.
Yeah, completely. So I think what it means is that we've created this kind of, or not we, but like what has been created is this sort of continuous outrage machine, and all it does is just push people further and further to the extremes. And I think it would make a lot of sense for us all to take a step back from social media. But I can't see it happening because it is very addictive, and so unless there's a concerted effort in government and across the world, which again at the moment I can't see happening, but maybe could happen in the future. It's difficult to see how that would change, and I think that's. I mean, social media has been a hugely sort of double-edged sword, I think, for live comedy, to bring it back to that, because I think on the one hand, for me personally, I started putting out videos regularly during COVID and then beyond. And that has meant that I've been able to build a following online, and I've done a couple of touring shows, which I would never have been able to do before. I would never have got an audience before. And now, I don't get a massive audience, but I get enough people to fill a small room and sometimes even a bit more than that. But I had also had the experience of my social media platform that really worked for me was Twitter. It's a more political one, and stuff I was doing was more political, and so it really worked, and the videos went viral and things. But then once Musk took it over and then started, as you say, thumbing the scale, turned it into X, it completely lost the use it had, and I've stopped posting on it. And so that's been kind of bad for me. But for other people, there are some people who've done hugely well off social media by posting clips. But as I said earlier, I think there are now so many clips online that if you want to watch stand-up, you've got a million options. And why would you go to your local comedy club? So like local comedy clubs, it's, and in a way, comedy clubs are putting up clips to try to get people to come and see stuff. But we are slightly the author of our own misfortune, because it's like in the old days, if you wanted to go and see comedy, you had to go to a comedy club. That was the only way you could see it. Whereas now you can just go on your phone and watch 1,000 clips in a row if you wanted to.
I know what you mean. Although there is still, and maybe it's because I'm an old codger, but there is still a part of me that thinks that from a kind of evolutionary point of view, we have been, for tens of thousands of years, we've been getting together. And I'm not saying that social media isn't powerful and stuff, but I'm not totally sure you do get the same experience online than some, like we were talking earlier about the sort of chemicals in your brain and stuff like that. I think different things happen when you're in a group versus, just thumbing, idly scrolling through billions and billions of an endless scroll of things. So
100%. No, I totally agree. I'm not, and I do think that live performance, live comedy, live music, live theatre will always have a place, and people will always want to do it. And there will be I think there will be, backlashes and people sort of going, actually, I think AI is a good example of, I think a lot of stuff online is now, it's like, Is it AI? Is it not AI? And I think there will be a desire, there will be a move towards authenticity.
Yes.
But the problem with that is that, there's going to be a lot of damage along the way. So, there will be a lot of people who lose out and lose careers and livelihoods because there will be a period of time where that's just the way it is, and then it will come back. So and I think live comedy is such a unique experience. It's so exciting and special when it works, and it's kind of magical when it works. But there's something about how do you convince an audience who think they can just watch it all online to come into a space and be with people when it's, and also I think live comedy is generally a really good value. It's, the tickets don't tend to be that expensive, certainly not compared to like a big West End show or something.
No, definitely not.
But people are struggling. Money is tight for a lot of people. And, if you say to people, come along, get a babysitter, come along to a show, buy a few drinks, then that's starting to set you back quite a lot of money. And even though it is by definition relatively cheap compared to other experiences, luxuries are always the first thing to go. Of course they are,
No, that is totally true. But if we get on to solving that, we'll get back into politics, Matt.
That's economics and politics,
which is a different thing. Let's get it back to you and your live performances. You are a very well polished act now. Can you think, what is it over the years that you've worked hardest on to end up with Matt Green in 2026?
I think working on material. I think there's a mix between trying to be ruthless about doing stuff that kind of works, but also allowing yourself to talk about things that maybe you're not sure if the audience are going to care about, but you care about, and I think that's something that the last few years I've been trying more to do, is to kind of not just be like, right, what do they care about? And I'll just talk about that. But like, what do I care about? And trying to make that combination work. And that's still a work in progress. I think there's still times where I'm too far on one side of that line or the other. I think being open, I think it is, a lot of it is just experience of just allowing yourself to just be in the room and to respond to what's happening in front of you. And I think sometimes it's that thing of like saying the thing that's in your head, saying without even thinking about it, just like let the relationship between your mouth and your brain be very, very quick, like not sort of thinking too much about, particularly when you're comparing or when you're doing audience work. Just don't second guess yourself too much. And again, that's a work in progress. There are times where I feel like I'm absolutely flying on that, and I can sort of, everything I say is great. And then there are definitely times where I'm like, oh, I feel like I'm wading through treacle and I don't know what's going on. And that's partly a personal thing. Partly, that will be, you've had a bad day, or you're a bit tired or whatever, and your brain isn't quite working. And then other times, as I said earlier, it's just something to do with the room or the environment. It's not quite right. But there are other times where, and I think maybe it's about like recognizing the times where you have to work hard, and recognizing the times where you can kind of surf and enjoy it, enjoy the feeling of this is just fun, and you're surfing and the audience are kind of on your wavelength, and sort of whatever you say is going to work tonight because there's something about it, and just kind of go with it and let yourself go with it, rather than sort of go, right, I have to get back to the thing I was going to do. Like, just allow yourself to go, okay, I guess this is what I'm doing now. I'm trying this thing now.
Beautiful. I agree with that so much. I think it's so easy for amateur speakers to become very self-absorbed, this is what I'm going to say. This is how I'm going to start. This is going to be the middle. This will be the end. And yeah, you can get to a certain level by, just self-awareness and learning what you're going to say. But I think really great speakers can just be in a room, and you don't need to change everything that you're going to say, but just a little reference to something that is just there and it's in the room, and the audience think, oh, wow, he couldn't have written that before he came on stage. I was speaking at a conference the other day, and there was a guy in a particularly kind of loud shirt. And for some reason, we were talking about rock stars or something like that. And I can't even remember what I said, but it was some kind of reference like, oh, gentleman there looks like he might be an act himself. Is that the case, sir? And everybody loved it in the room because they're just kind of watching it happen in front of them.
Yeah.
And so many people kind of just completely miss that relatively kind of low-hanging fruit of just being in a room with people, I think.
Totally. And I think also something you just said then reminded me of another thing I think is really important, is varying your performance based on the situation as well. That sometimes you have to talk slower, sometimes you have to talk a bit faster, sometimes louder or quieter. Sometimes a joke will work if you kind of speed up to the end and then really hit the punchline hard. Other times you can give yourself time to just play with it and see what happens. And I think that's part of, there are some jokes I've been doing for years now, and I probably should, drop them because I should work on some different stuff. But partly I do them because they work, and partly because, you don't have time always to keep writing new material all the time. And so you've got your old, your favorites. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean you do them exactly the same every time. That doesn't mean that you, it's a bit like, that's, I think, something that being a stage actor, people talk about. I heard someone talking about this the other day on another podcast. And they were talking about being in a very long run of a show, like, hundreds of performances, and saying that they went through all these different emotions with it. Because when you're doing a stage show, when it's it's a play, and this is a musical they were talking about, you can't just improvise and ad lib and change stuff. You've got to stick within the script, because it's all very controlled, and there are costumes and props and music cues and lighting cues and stage cues. You can't be messing around. So how do you keep that alive?
Yeah. Yeah. So you aren't just kind of dialing it in.
Yeah, and it's difficult, and it's hard, and I'm sure we've all done performances where we've come off and thought, I was basically on autopilot there. And you've got to, and how do you shake yourself out of that? And how do you go, no, I need to not be an autopilot. I need to, and sometimes it is literally about like letting go of the steering wheel, as it were, just kind of going,
yep,
let's see what happens, and try to shake yourself up a bit and change what you do, or change the order of something, or stop halfway through a joke and see if you can get the, I do that sometimes. I'll do a joke and I'll kind of, it's a routine that's got 4 bits, and I'll just stop after bit 2 and see, like, does that work? If I just stop there, is that enough of a joke? Can I just can I get out of that joke there and then move on to something else? Do I have to finish it off? Do I have to finish the whole story? And sometimes you find actually it works even better if you don't finish it. And other times you feel like, oh no, that kind of was missing something. I kind of lost something by not finishing the story. And then other times, and then sometimes you can finish it later. You can go like, I'll come back to it later. And then you can sometimes create whole like little patterns for yourself in your set, and that you can break it up and go, I'll start that story and then I'll finish it story over here. And then you end up, creating callbacks and all the rest of it. And that's just about staying alive in the material as you're doing it.
Completely. And it's what you're saying there about breaking the convention that you've set yourself, and that obviously sets you up for it either to work better or for it to work worse. Over the years of all the performances that you've done, what do you think your relationship has been between success and failure?
Oh, that's an interesting one. That's it's quite a philosophical question, or even a therapy question.
It is a bit.
I think you have to. I think if you're going to do a job like stand up, or acting, particularly acting, both in different ways, really. You have to be okay with failure. You have to accept it as part of the job. Failure, rejection.
Yeah.
The worst version of both of those, which is just ghosting, nothing.
You're right. Right.
Lots of, as an actor, I must have done probably thousands of auditions now, or maybe, I don't know, certainly hundreds. And, you only hear back from maybe half of them, and you only hear something positive from a way smaller percentage. And so
that's crap, isn't it?
You just have to kind of be okay with that. And you have to be able to walk out of a room, or in these days, it's usually send in a self-tape. So send in a thing you've filmed yourself.
Right.
And you have to be able to press send and then sort of let it out of your mind and go, okay, that's gone now. If I ever hear back, great. And if I don't, then it wasn't meant to be. And I think with comedy, there's a similar feeling of like, we all die, we all have bad gigs. Every time you think, I think I've kind of nailed this. I think I kind of know what I'm doing. You're guaranteed to have a bad. This happened to me. It was so. It was just perfect timing. Recently, I was at a party for the podcast company that I work for. I do a political podcast, sort of with slightly comic elements to it, but it's basically a political podcast. And they run a whole bunch of podcasts. And it was a couple of weeks ago, and at this party, talking to various people I hadn't seen for a while, and one of them said to me, how long have you been doing stand-up now? I was like, oh God, more than 20 years. And they said, do you get nervous now? And, do you ever have bad gigs? Like, how's it go? And I said, look, yes, I have bad. I don't get that nervous anymore. Like if I had a big gig, if I was going to do a TV show or I was going to be on it live at the Apollo or something, then I'd be definitely nervous. But generally speaking, for a small, normal kind of comedy club, don't get that nervous. Might get a bit of adrenaline at some point, but I don't get really nervous. And in terms of bad gigs, gigs tend to be okay. Tend to just, you sometimes what I said earlier. My standard for what a bad gig is has changed and blah blah blah. And then of course the next gig I did was a venue I've done many many times. It wasn't one I wasn't worried about it. I wasn't sort of panicked about it, stressed about it. It was quiet. They were a quiet crowd. It wasn't very busy. And I was opening, which is always the hardest place to be. Mm-hmm. And the compere had done okay. And I could feel like, they'd not, compere wasn't someone I knew. And I felt like they hadn't quite got the audience that warmed up, but it was okay. It wasn't, I've definitely seen a lot worse. And I went on and it just didn't happen. I was on stage and I was doing all my stuff and I was doing my jokes and I was kind of hitting the beats that I normally hit. And it wasn't happening. And I did a bit of audience work and that didn't really work either. And now look, I came off stage and I was like, I kind of died there. But people came up to me and were like, oh, I enjoyed that. That was fun. And, so I didn't actually fully die. I didn't have like and I've definitely had those in the past as well. I didn't have one where everyone looks at their shoes and no one talks to you and, people come up to you and go, what else do you do, mate? Are you a plumber as well? Because they can't they can't believe that you do this for a living. It wasn't that bad.
No.
I've definitely had a lot of those over the years, but it was definitely one where I was like, that was hard work. Like that was like, pushing through cement. And for whatever reason, the audience were just not, it wasn't that they were horrible. They just weren't laughing. They were just, maybe they were smiling. Some of them seemed to be enjoying it quietly, but it was not getting that response that you expect. And it was a good reminder, not that I needed it, but it was just a reminder that that's always going to happen. There's always going to be one of those gigs around the corner. Doesn't matter how long you've been doing it. Doesn't matter how good you are. Doesn't matter how, good you think you're in form. There's always going to be a gig around the corner that makes you go, ugh, what was that?
And you mentioned that you don't drink. Like, what would be your kind of like coping or ways to quantify that in your head in order to get back on the horse next time?
Well, I think it's good to have gigs in the diary. I mean, that's the advice I would give to particularly people starting out, actually. Always have at least 2 or 3 gigs in the diary, if possible. I know it's difficult to put gigs when you start out, but like always have 2 or 3 in the diary if you can, because And because this definitely happened to me early on. You know, I would have not a great gig, but then I had another gig the next week, and I was like, well, I've got to go and do that. I can't just pull out of the gig, so I go and do, and then that's a bit better. And so, you know, getting back on the horse is part of the deal. You've got to just keep going. And I think the people who stop are often the people who have like one gig every 3 months or something. And they just don't ever build any momentum.
Yeah.
So that's a big part of it, I think. And I think also just being aware that, well, I have had good gigs before. I've been in that room before and I've had good gigs. And, you know, I'll probably have a good gig tomorrow. So it'll be fine. Like, it's just that sort of memory of like remembering like, yeah, it feels bad and it feels uncomfortable and embarrassing when it happens. But at the end of the day, you know, I think I did my job as well as I could. I didn't shout at anybody. Again, that's the thing of what I talked about a little while ago about like, you know, not saying, oh, I'm having a bad gig, you know? Because actually, I think what happened, I think that is often the difference between having an average to bad gig and actually having a bad gig. Because I think if you're having it like the gig I'm thinking of, which happened a couple of weeks ago, I was having an average to bad gig. Like I wasn't dying, but I could feel that the audience were really not on board enough. And I was having to really push to get any response. But if I'd said, God, this is tough, isn't it? And you guys are fucking disastrous. Or, you know, like,
yeah.
Come on, mate. Where, you know, do you even know how to laugh? And whatever. And all things I've seen people do on stage. You know, or if I picked on someone and said, come on, that was funny. Why weren't you laughing at that? Whatever. That would have killed the gig. That would have then driven the gig into the dirt.
Yeah, right.
You know?
Yeah,
As it was, I kept smiling, kept doing my stuff. I ended on a joke, which normally gets a big laugh, and it got a kind of bit of a laugh. And I was like, right, that's enough. You know, I've got a bit of a laugh. I've done my time. Thanks very much. You've been a lovely audience.
You've been an absolute delight, ladies.
You guys, you know, you've got a great show coming up. Enjoy the rest of your night. I've been Matt Green. Good night. And then people come up to you and go, oh, you did well there. And then sometimes, you know, people come and go, oh, that was a bit tough. They were a bit hard work, weren't they? I thought you deserved more than that, you know. And then you go, yeah, I think you're right. You know, maybe that's true. But every gig's, you know, it is what it is.
No, totally. I so often think when you're speaking to any group, it's like you're a conductor at the front of an orchestra, and what you're projecting onto people is what they take away, as opposed to them over analyzing it. Like one of the things when we deal with amateur speakers is that it drives me up the wall when someone will put themselves down at the start of any piece of speaking.
Yeah.
And you're so right. It's a self-defense mechanism. So it's like a preemptive strike.
Yeah.
You're worried that what you've got to say will be classed as boring.
Yeah.
Therefore, if at the start of what you say to a whole group of people, well, this is going to be terribly dull.
Yeah.
Then if you come off and someone goes, bleeding hell, that was a bit dry, weren't it? You could say, well, I told you it was going to be boring.
Yeah.
But I think in reality, you are then starting that off on a negative path. You're basically saying to a room of people, you don't really have to listen to this because I think it's boring and you probably will too. And people just kind of go, yeah, fair enough. All right, I won't. Go on then, get on with it. And they just kind of look out the window while you're talking instead of starting it like, right, thank you so much for coming. Everyone goes, oh, wow.
Yeah.
This sounds like it's going to be good.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there are loads of, if you're doing a speech or if you're doing a presentation, there are lots of tricks to how to get that going at the beginning. I mean, something I often do is something, this isn't unique to me by any means. Lots of people do this, some version of it. We all have our own little, twist on it. But is that thing of people saying, I'm so glad they got my email about how I wanted the room to be set out, because I'll be honest, I turn up at rooms and they often don't do it. But tonight, for the first time ever, they've absolutely nailed it. And then you just go around the room and you point at everything that's a bit odd, and you go, I'm so glad that there's a there's a grand piano halfway down the room. I needed that. I didn't want it on stage. I wanted it off stage. I'm, I'm glad that I'm glad that there's a pile of books at the back of the stage. I'm glad that the lighting is red and green rather than white. I much prefer that. I don't want people to be able to see my face probably. I'm really glad that you're 4.5 meters away from me rather than, whatever it is. Again, 9 times out of 10, that's a really good way to start a show because it breaks the ice and people kind of acknowledge that you're in the room and you are improvising because you couldn't have made that up beforehand.
Precisely. Precisely.
Sometimes it doesn't work. Occasionally it doesn't work. Sometimes people are like, well, this is the room, deal with it, But a lot of the times it does. And when it does, it's a good way of starting. And I think that's the same. But again, it's about how you pitch it. Because there's another way of doing that, which is the reverse of that, which is coming on and going, oh God, I can't believe I'm in a room where there's a bloody grand piano and the lighting's rubbish and the mic doesn't work and you're miles away and there's a dance floor here. And, and it's you're saying sort of the same things, but you're saying it in a negative way.
Yeah.
Which makes the audience feel kind of a bit bad for you and also a bit bad for themselves. Why have they come to this rubbish venue? But it's that sort of mock celebration of it, of like, I can't believe how incredible this venue is. It's the perfect space.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And there's a sort of beautiful sweet spot with that where it's a room that everybody kind of knows is a bit weird, but it works. It's not very effective if you're in a room that's absolutely dreadful, like that is so bad that like even pointing out how bad it is doesn't really help because the audience are like, yeah, you're right, it is freezing and the lighting is terrible and also you are too far away and it's just, this isn't going to work. But there's a nice, there's a sweet spot that most gigs are at, which is the only problem with that as an opening is you can't do that at the Comedy Store.
No.
Or the Glee Club, or one of these, big venues, or a theatre a lot of the time, because what are you going to say? I'm glad they got my email to be a lovely venue and everything's right. Get
on with it.
That's not. That's what you're expecting. So then you have to. And I remember someone saying that to me a while ago about. I used to do lots of these gigs for a company called Mirth Control, who are kind of quite. Famous / infamous in the comedy world because they have lots and lots of, or certainly used to have lots and lots of very small gigs. And I did for a couple of years, I did lots and lots of gigs for them, and it was great. And I'm not, I would never put them down because I think they served a really important purpose of small gigs for people who don't do bigger gigs, and it's a really good learning process. And they go to venues in little towns and villages and stuff that maybe no one else has thought of doing comedy in. So I think they are, they have been a very, very good, a good thing over the years for lots of people, and myself included. But those are the kind of gigs where absolutely guarantee that joke would work at the beginning because every venue you went to, there was something a bit weird about it. There was something, even if it wasn't in the room itself, it would be on there'd be something outside the room that was weird, or there'd be something in the village that was weird, and you could reference it.
No,
but totally. I remember someone saying to me at the time, you've got to be careful though that you don't get too good in bad rooms, because you then can start not being able to do good rooms. You're used to the rooms.
Yeah.
You're used to having so much to say about the room and kind of enjoying the kind of chaos of it and enjoying the fact that it's all a bit shonky and the room's not quite right, and you don't need the microphone because it's a small room and you can kind of walk up and down the audience and you can do crazy, you can do like big physical things because that's works in that space. But if you walk on stage at the Glee Club or the Comedy Store or various other places where the room is actually pretty good and is set up and ready, you then suddenly go, oh God, I haven't got my first 5 minutes. Where's my first 5 minutes?
Completely. Yeah, absolutely spot on. And I, like you, I mean, as far as like learning the trade, I don't think there was much better than Mirth Control gigs.
Yeah.
Just because they were all so different and sometimes it was a lovely little theatre somewhere in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
Other times it would be a microphone in the corner of a pub that was just full of punters.
Yeah. And it was just showing the football in the other room.
Showing the football, playing pool. There's a fruit machine that someone wins 20 quid out of every now and then. And and you had to just do it. You know, a big act would look at the room, turn on their heels, fire their agent and leave. But as you say, this is the show. Whatever happens here, this is the show. And you have to deal with it. I also just got to take you back to say, I had no idea when I started how important something that you said about 5 minutes ago was, because the conversation moved on to something else. But that tip of having gigs booked in your diary just to keep you on the horse, I can vividly remember. I think it's Chippenham. Is that on the M4, Chippenham, just before you get to Bath? It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
I can remember driving there and dying horrendously.
We've all done it. Chippenham's not an easy gig, I think that's fair to say.
Right. Now, I was at university in Swansea, so I've still got pals around that part of London, of the country. So it's junction 17 on the M4, and I see it, and I get a little shiver down my spine, but I carry on. And I told a friend of mine about it afterwards. And I take him through the whole thing, and he is like, you know, looking at me through his fingers, rocking backwards and forwards. And he said to me, "Oh God, Sam, I'm so sorry. Do you reckon you're going to do it again?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm in Brighton on Friday night, and I'm in Norwich on Saturday." And he was like, "Oh my God." And it had never... No one had ever explained it to me like that. The idea of just getting back on the horse quickly, working out what you can learn. Sometimes it's something you've done wrong. Sometimes it's something in the room and you wonder what, you know, thinking Bob Hope would have done to have rescued it. But whatever's happened, I think if you just tell yourself, I'm going to just keep going, then you can't help but get better. Here's a question. Do you think great speakers are made or born, Matt?
I think made, to be honest. I think, I think truly great speakers, I'm sure, you know, Barack Obama, there's something about him from an early age. But I think, I think a lot of it is about experience. I think you have to have something in you that wants to be in front of an audience. That was what I was going to say to you about your experience. I think your experience of having a bad gig, I think that is the litmus test of whether you are someone who should try and do comedy or not. Because basically, if you have a bad gig and your first thought is, I want to do another gig, then you're a comedian. You know,
yeah,
you might not be a good comedian. You might not be you might not be a successful comedian, but you're a comedian because that's what you want to do. It's like, you know, if you play sport, if you play pool and you have a terrible game of pool and the first thing you want to do is play another game of pool, then you want to play, you know, you're a pool player. Like, it's the same with comedy, I think. If you want it, because most people don't want to do it. Most people don't want to be in front of audience. And I think if you widen it out to speaking generally, most people don't want to speak. You know, there's all these evolutionary reasons why we don't. You know, I remember researching this for a show once, and, you know, there's all these theories about why being a speaker in front of an audience is so difficult for people. And one of the theories is that it goes back to sort of the primeval part of our brain, the amygdala, which says people looking at you is dangerous. You know, you're the wrong way round. You're the wrong bit of this scenario. You know, hunting is about lots of people looking at one thing. So if you're the person being looked at, then you're being the one you're the hunted. You're the you're being looked at by the wolves or the hunters or whatever. There's something very deep in our psyche that says to most people, to 95% of people, you're standing in the wrong place. But for a few people, for a percentage of people, it's the other way around, that actually you feel uncomfortable watching something. You want to be on stage. You want to be the person there.
Yeah, right.
And I have lots of memories as a teenager and a bit older of going to concerts and gigs and things and being in the audience and thinking, I kind of want to be doing this. Like, this is, and and not really knowing how I would do it or where that would work, or it wasn't like I wanted to be a stand-up or anything. It was just something about the feeling of like, I like the idea of being in front of an audience for some reason. So I think a big part of it is there is an inherent thing about whether you want to do it or not. But I think a lot of it can be learned. A lot of it is tricks. A lot of it is technique. A lot of it is repetition and learning and allowing yourself to learn, allowing yourself to see what went wrong. I mean, something I was going to say after what you said, having a bad gig thing. I think this is something that maybe happens less now. I don't know, but stick around and watch the headliner.
Yeah.
If you're a new act, I mean, if you've been doing it for 20 years, you've probably seen them a million times. Don't worry about it. But if you're a new act, this is certainly how I felt a lot of the time. Not every time, and I did go home early sometimes, and because I didn't drive, I often had to get trains and things. But particularly if I was in the car with people, you've got to think of it as like a privilege that you get to see great comics, or even maybe not great comics, but just good comics who've been doing it a while, doing the same job that you're doing immediately after you. In what other job do you get that? If you're a plumber, when you do a bad job, you don't get a brilliant plumber turning up 10 minutes later going, here's how you should have done it. Like that's, and obviously good jobs with good training schemes do that, but, and if you're a lawyer or whatever, then yes, you train with other lawyers and that's how it works. And I think with comedy, I think there can sometimes now be a bit of a feeling amongst newer acts or younger acts that, well, I don't need that because I can watch it all online. I can watch TikTok.
But
it's not the same. It's something about being in the same room, because we've all had that experience of going on. I mean, I remember having this, just to name drop, I remember having this experience with Michael McIntyre. Brilliant. I was very new. I was doing a 10-minute set at a gig in Ealing, and it was just before McIntyre broke. So he was so ready. He was brilliant, but wasn't quite famous yet. I think he'd just done Royal Variety maybe, but hadn't. I think he had a bit of TV stuff, but he hadn't yet broken in, done Live at the Apollo, and then everything that came after that. So this must have been like 2004, 5, maybe 2006, but it was around then. And I was doing this Ealing gig, and I was on in the middle, and the first act, the opening act, had struggled a little bit. It had been a bit cold as a room, and it hadn't quite gone. And I'd gone on in the middle and had a good gig, and I felt good about myself. And I was like, I've done pretty well there. I've nailed that. And yes, you're aware that you're in the middle, which is the easiest spot, and you're doing 10 minutes, and that's not 20 minutes, and all those things. But I remember having this feeling of like, I did pretty well there. And then Michael McIntyre came on and just took the room to a place that I couldn't have imagined. I was like, well, hang on, this wasn't in the room. This wasn't available. This wasn't possible. And yet he's, it's like a great sports person, cricket's one of my favorite sports, and you watch someone scratching around to make 20 off 50 balls, and then the next player comes on and smashes 50 off 10. And you're like, well, how did that happen? And it's because they're better, or they're in more form, or they're whatever. But that, they are in the same space as you were, and the same audience. Yes, the audience maybe are a little bit drunker or whatever it is, but basically they're doing the same job as you in the same space, and they did it better than you. And you've got to think about why. Why did they do it better than you? And how did they do it better than you? And I think I learned so much in those early gigs, watching, I would do 5 minutes, 10 minutes, maybe even when I was opening, doing 20 minutes at the beginning. And I would do okay, or I'd struggle, or, whatever, I'd get to it. Or I'd even go, I think I smashed that. And then you watch someone else coming on and headlining, and you go, oh no, he smashed it. Like,
Definitely.
he smashed it. I did all right. I did perfectly well, but he smashed it. Like, yeah. And
it's that willingness and openness to learn. That's the thing, isn't it? Going back to like the Mirth gigs as well, what would often happen there is that the comics would live in London and the gigs would be outside London. So you'd carpool.
Yeah.
And I can remember driving back from gigs in places like fucking Devon. We would get back at like 4 a.m. after a gig, and you're analysing the show. And it's like, oh, did you see that couple down the front? You know, she'd obviously bought the tickets and he kind of had his arms folded with me. Did you do anything about that? Yeah, I made a joke about that. I completely ignored her or I just spoke to him, or I ignored him.
Yeah.
Whatever it was, whoever was in there. And I genuinely think to myself, if you analyse what you're doing, you analyze it before, you work out, as we were saying earlier on in this, what's important, what's important for this story. If you analyze when you're on, if you stick around afterwards and you analyze something else, you can't help but get better as you go through. It's almost impossible not to get better.
Totally. And I think if you see, you know, good headliners, people who've been doing it a long time, they have gears. They have different gears. I remember seeing someone at a student gig, and again, this was a tough gig and it was a big room. There weren't many people, and I'd been comparing it and it'd been quite hard work. And this act came on. He's a brilliant act. He's still doing it. And he came on, the first 5-10 minutes just didn't really work. They weren't up for it. Like, he was too old. He was in his 40s or something, and they were in their 20s or teenagers, and it just wasn't connecting with them at all. And I remember thinking, God, if I was him, I don't know what I would do. Like, I just would keep going, I suppose. But he stopped and reset and started doing crowd work and started bringing them in and going like, who are you and what are you up to? And like bringing the audience together. And then by the end, he was having a great gig. And it's that thing of like, he could do that because he had the gears and he had the experience and he'd been doing it. And also he didn't give up. He didn't just throw the gig. He didn't go, this is just some student gig in the middle of nowhere. You know, I don't need this. No one's going to care if I do a good gig or not. He had the professionalism and the sort of intent to be like, no, I'm going to make it work, you know, and I really respect that.
It's fascinating. Matt, I'm aware this has been going on a while and you probably have more things to accomplish today than the before, during, after podcast. One more question, buddy. What's the most surprising thing that you've learned from spending years in front of audiences?
Well, I think I will answer that with an awful cliche, but it's a cliche because it's true. You can't judge a book by its cover. You just never know with an audience. And you can walk out, and what I tend to do, and this is maybe a bit counterintuitive, but I quite like sometimes, and you're saying about, you know, pre-gig rituals. I have a bit of a pre-gig ritual sometimes, which is I sometimes try and talk myself out of the gig if I think it's not going to be good. Like if I'm looking at it and I'm like, oh, this is going to be tough. This is like not enough people in a big room and they all look about 98 and no one's drinking and it's cold and, you know, all those things. And I, you know, if I'm with friends backstage or, you know, I won't do it if there are people I don't really know backstage because I don't want to psych people out. I'm not trying to psych anyone else out. I'm just trying to talk to myself. I'm sort of trying to give myself permission to just go out and do what I can. Be like, well, you know, this is probably gonna be terrible, but it's fine. I'll do what I can. I'll do the best I can. And that's so sort of lower my own expectations.
Right.
So it's the opposite of doing that to an audience, because I think that's a negative thing to do. But for me personally, I find it quite helpful sometimes to kind of lower my own expectations and be like, this is not going to be a gig I'm going to talk about in 10 years time. So don't worry about it. Just go out there, have as much fun as you can. And And actually, 9 times out of 10, they're fine. The gig is fine. And sometimes it can be wonderful. And you go out and you think, how on earth did this happen? This is, if you go down a checklist of things that are wrong about the room and wrong about the audience, in inverted commas, they all look like this, and they've all this, and they're all drinking the same. No, they're absolutely gorgeous. They're a great gig. They love it. They've been up for it from the beginning. You never know. And then there are other gigs you turn up at and you think, this is a brilliant room. It's been well set out. It's packed. Everyone seems to be having a good time. I think they're going to be lovely. And they're an absolute nightmare. And, someone's heckling, or something happens, someone's on their phone, or something trips over, or you go on and you say something slightly odd at the beginning by mistake. You kind of reference something that doesn't quite work, or you try that joke about like, oh, I'm glad they got the email, and it doesn't really work because something, whatever. Or you say something to an audience member right at the beginning and they react in a slightly strange way, which you're not expecting. And then that really throws you, and whatever. And then suddenly the gig's a nightmare. And then you have to spend the whole rest of the gig sort of fighting your way to get back to zero.
Yeah.
And I think that would be, and it's a basic thing that I think is so true about stand-up, that we spend our lives going around playing audiences. No one vets the audience. No one checks the audience in advance. We don't know who we're playing to. Yes, some gigs tend to attract certain kinds of people or not. Certain areas of the country maybe a bit like this or a bit like that, but there's no guarantees. You just never know. And so you have to be open enough and willing enough to just sort of throw yourself in front of whoever. And you might turn up and there's a whole bunch of people who have got reform, flags on their table, and you think, oh no, this is going to be, and they're absolutely fine, and you think,
absolutely.
And as long as you don't deliberately wind them up and sort of go in and go, well, Nigel Farage is an absolute bastard, isn't it? And as the first thing you say, then they'll be fine. Because if maybe you might be able to say that, but later in the gig when you've got them on side, you might be able to say, you've got reform. You're all reform people. Interesting. Well, what do you like about Nigel? And then sort of get into a bit of a conversation about it, and then maybe go, I'm not a huge fan of him, honest. And here are the reasons why. And you can sort of make fun of it and have fun with it, rather than just being aggressive. Being aggressive rarely works. But yeah, that'd be the thing that surprised me the most, and continues to surprise me. Every gig you do, you've just got to remember they're just a whole new bunch of people, and they might surprise you, and they often do.
Yeah, that's it. They might love it, they might hate it, it might be somewhere in the middle. Matt, what a brilliant way for us to finish what I think has been a fantastic conversation.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
My dear fellow, just before you go, on the tiniest of off chances that there has been anyone who during this podcast has encountered Matt Green for the first time in their lives, what is the best way for them to find out what you're up to and get more involved?
Well, I'm in the toxic waste dump of social media in various places. I'm not on X anymore, basically, but I am pretty much everywhere else. You can find me at Matt Green Comedy, basically. I'm on Blue Sky a lot at mattgreencomedy.com. My website is mattgreencomedy.com, has all the links and stuff on there. So yeah, come along.
Awesome. Buddy, best of luck with everything you're up to. Come down and do a gig in Lingfield one day with us.
I will.
I think people there will absolutely love you. And finally, thank you again for your time and such brilliant, considered answers.
No worries. Lovely to speak.
There he goes, Matt Green. What a top bloke, and smart too. As ever, here are 3 takeaways from me from that chat. Firstly, your audience has no idea what is supposed to happen next. If you mispronounce a word or get your slides in slightly a wrong order, whatever it is, just keep going. Secondly, clarity beats completeness every day of the week. Whether you're telling a story, giving a presentation, or even doing a comedy set. The audience don't need all the details. They need relevant details. And lastly, success comes from showing up again and again. Everyone has off days. If you keep doing anything, I promise you, you will improve. Someone told me years ago, it's not the most talented comics that make it. It's the most hard-working. Thanks for listening to Before, During, After, a Smirk Experience podcast about performance from the inside. If you've enjoyed it, why not share it with someone who you think might get it? And give us a follow while you're at it. See you next time.